Welcome to the Click podcast. I'm Dani Watson, a mindset and manifestation expert and founder of The Click, a company that helps women overcome their fears and limiting beliefs to create a life and business that they love. Within this podcast, I will help you get clear on what you want, identify the blocks that are holding you back, transform your mindset and raise your vibration so that you can co-create magic with the universe. If you are looking to design a life that truly sets your soul on fire and manifest more success and abundance, then you are in the right place.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. So I'm super excited to introduce you to today's guest, Dani Watson, who I've gotten to know recently, and we had such an amazing conversation on her podcast, and I'm really excited to have her here. So welcome to the show, Dani.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, and I can't wait to dive in with you. So can you just start by telling us just a little bit about you and your journey and kind of how you got to where you are now?
Sure. So, I guess if we're going right back to the beginning, I won't give my full history, but a bit of context to start. So I started out my career in the legal world, realizing very quickly that I did not want to be in the corporate space at all. But I think, like many people that are in the corporate world, did not really have any idea about what I wanted to do as an alternative. So yeah, I found myself very lost, very sort of overwhelmed with what direction my life was going in. And I kind of refer to this time in my life as my rock bottom because it felt like everything kind of fell apart all at once. So not just in the career, but the relationship I was in really wasn't serving me financially. My life was a bit of a mess. And so I actually sought out the support of a coach, mainly just to help me with my own self-worth, with my confidence, with how I was feeling, and also to kind of help me figure out perhaps what my purpose was in life. And it was from that experience that I thought, actually, this is something that perhaps I want to explore. Maybe coaching is something that I could be good at. I'm from the UK, and at the time, coaching really wasn't a big thing. It's grown significantly since then. And so I found that a lot of people that I knew didn't really understand what coaching was. So when I would be, explaining to friends and family, this is what I'm thinking of pursuing, everyone was like, what? This doesn't make sense. But I think when I sort of discovered it, I just kind of knew, I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work, but it just feels like it's the right path. And pretty much haven't looked back since. So my first sort of steps into coaching was sort of me as a coach. I did a lot around self-worth, self-love. I love to bring things like the law of attraction into my work. And after a few years, I found that I was attracting a lot of women who were either looking for support in sort of their business or also kind of looking support into stepping into the coaching industry. And so it kind of planted this seed of, okay, I'd really, really love to perhaps help women who, like me, were also struggling to figure out their purpose, help them step into this coaching space. Something that was very relevant on my journey was the fact that when I was looking to train as a coach, everything felt super masculine, very corporate in its approach. And a lot of the coaching that I'd learned, I felt didn't necessarily resonate with a lot of women. So I'd started to weave in a lot more of a holistic practice into my coaching, bringing in things like law of attraction and self-love and looking at our belief system. It wasn't just about this is the goal and coaching somebody to the goal. It was really about looking at the person and really kind of helping them shift their identity. And I felt that there wasn't a lot of coach training out there that really kind of focused on that. So I had this idea of really wanting to build my own certification program. And so that was kind of my next big venture, which is the Click Academy, which has now been running for 5 years. So that's where a lot of my energy has been over sort of the past 5 years, really building that out and making it the best women-centered coach certification that it possibly can be. And then my work now as a coach, it's really started to center more around feminine leadership. So a lot of my work that I do with my coaching clients, sometimes it's entrepreneurs and business owners, but I also do a lot of work with corporate women. And it's really helping them redefine how they succeed, how they lead, and how they make money by learning how to embrace their feminine energy more. So I've got kind of a lot of things going on at the moment, but the coach training coupled alongside the coaching that I do, they're kind of the core elements of my business.
Wow, I love that. And, I love to talk about trauma and challenges and how you like overcome them. So for you, like when you went down this path, like what were some of the biggest challenges or like maybe some of those points where you were like, can I really do this? And then how did you overcome that?
Great question. Well, I think when I was first kind of brought into this whole space and I was really going on my own kind of healing journey and really kind of figuring out, okay, what is it that I really want? I was looking at the big problems in my life as like taking them at face value. So my problems were my relationship. So I was engaged to somebody it was a very toxic relationship. He was cheating on me, and I was kind of basically ignoring that was happening because I didn't want to be on my own. I was also struggling financially. So I was overspending. I think maybe to compensate for how I was feeling, to avoid really addressing my emotions, I was numbing out. So I was spending like a woman possessed on things which I don't even know what I spent my money on, if I'm being completely honest. Like there was a lot of late night online shopping and, these crazy shopping sprees. So I was kind of looking at these surface problems. I was like, okay, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'm lost in my career. That's a career problem. My relationship's a mess. That's a relationship problem. My finances are in a mess. That's a money problem. And I realized all of these problems, when I started to really peel it all back, came back down to the same thing, which was my own sense of worth. And I now realize that, having worked with a lot of women in this space, that a lot of the problems that we have in life, it's very rarely that face value problem. Often it goes a lot deeper, and the majority of the time it will be something to do with our sense of worth. And you will probably know this as well from your work, that a lot of the time that lack of worthiness, it can really be traced back to when we were a young age. So for me, this was really about peeling back the layers of not just what I'd experienced as an adult, but going back into my childhood and really examining, like, where did this lack of worthiness come from? Where did this inability to see myself as innately worthy come from? And for me, this was really challenging because I had a really happy upbringing. So you mentioned the word trauma, and for ages I really resisted recognizing that I'd experienced any kind of trauma, because I was like, well, my parents were super loving. There was definitely challenges in the home. Financially, we weren't like super affluent. There was a lot of arguments between my parents. They're still married today. So, again, like I look back and I think, well, they're still together. That, I wasn't a child of a broken home, but it was very explosive parenting. And my father was away a lot. So I kind of thought to myself, it was a relatively normal upbringing. I didn't experience any trauma. But then I realized that trauma doesn't necessarily need to present itself as something like, abuse or something. There's different severities when it comes to trauma. And actually, I was dismissing a lot of what had happened to me because I felt, well, everybody experiences this and I didn't have it that bad. I can't really complain about how my childhood was because it was really quite loving and, it was not a bad childhood. But going into some of those past experiences, I realized that a lot of my unworthiness came back to the experiences I had as a child, the relationship I had with my parents. A big one for me, which was really tied in with my worthiness, was that I felt I was only worthy if I was working hard, for example. So a lot of the time when I got praise or love or, rewards as a child, it was often because I was working hard. I think this is really what led me into the work as a feminine leadership coach, because for me, I was so addicted to the stress, the struggle, and proving myself through achievements and my external accomplishments, because that was the way that I was feeling validated. So for me, a big part of this worthiness piece was learning to love, honor, and accept all of who I am despite those external achievements. So yeah, it's been a big journey, a big sort of process, but and I think something that I'm continuously working on. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought this up because I think this is a really important piece around, because I will talk to a lot of women who are like, well, I don't feel like I really experienced trauma. And I'm like, well, after you work with me, you'll change your mind, right? But like, it is a very common thing, especially for people who had, a somewhat normal upbringing. And even for me, I remember when I first started learning breathwork when I was in my early 20s, I would be at these trainings and everyone's talking about healing. And I remember being like, what's everyone healing from? Like, what are we healing from? Like, I was so confused because I was 19, 20 years old. I didn't get what we were healing from literally. And then obviously after a while, I started to get it. And that's why I love to define trauma for people, because people think it's only these bigger things.
Yeah.
And, if you had two parents who loved you and you had everything provided for you, then it's well, what are we traumatized from? And it's there's so much more nuance to it. And there's so many more little things, like you said, that we can take on that are detrimental to us, and we don't even realize it. So I love that you brought that up, because I think it's such an important piece. And then the other piece of it too is I think people, they don't want to blame their parents because they're like, oh, well, my parents did a really good job and they did the best that they could. So the idea of even saying that their parents did something wrong can be really challenging for people because they feel guilty.
Exactly, that guilt.
Yeah. So I love that you brought that up, because I think it's so, so important. I'd love to hear too. Well, there's a few things. One, you mentioned money and feminine leadership and changing the way that we make money and the way we think about money. Can you talk more about that? Because I think it's such an important piece around even the way women make money, because I think we still can associate that with more of a masculine energy or just this old paradigm of what it means to make money. So what does that mean to you? The feminine way of making money?
Great question. Well, I think for me, my beliefs and my upbringing around money was always that it has to be hard work. And I think starting from a very early age, when the majority of our beliefs are kind of first formed, it was seeing my dad go away and having to sacrifice family time and work very hard for actually very little money. We weren't by any means poor, but definitely weren't rich and affluent. So it was well, okay, if I've got to make even enough money just to provide for my family, it's going to require a lot of hard work. And so that was really ingrained with me. And then that was reinforced through my experience of being in the corporate world, where people were actually making very good money. I worked in the city and I was working for stockbrokers and the legal department there. And so people at the top of the game were making incredible money. But I was seeing that and I was thinking, well, at what cost? Because look at how stressed you are. Look at how burnt out you are. You're getting to spend very little time with your family and loved ones. And for me, that just didn't really sit well. And one of the reasons that I never saw myself in the corporate space, because I thought, yes, I would love to be very wealthy. But for me, what I value more is my freedom and doing something that I really, really love. And I'd rather sacrifice this incredible career for doing something that I love, that brings me so much joy and doesn't require me to be stressed and burnt out. So coaching for me was more of an opportunity for me to slow down and adopt a gentler pace of life. However, because of all of these subconscious programming around money, I found myself very, very quickly reverting back into those same patterns of working very hard, stress, struggle. And my first sort of few years working as a coach, I made incredible money. And I loved the fact that I was able to grow my business, very, very quickly. But equally, there was a point, and it was the point in my business where I'd hit the 7-figure mark. So I was in year 3 of my business. And this was something that I'd never in my wildest dreams thought this was ever going to be something I'd be able to achieve that early on. So it was supposed to be this huge celebratory moment. And I celebrated. But the celebration felt really, really short-lived. And I was like, what is going on here? This is such a big milestone for me. And it's something that I've been manifesting now for, it felt like a long time, even though, 3 years is pretty short. It felt like it had been in my head forever because I'd been thinking about it every day. And I thought, well, why am I feeling so flat? Why am I feeling a bit almost disillusioned? It felt like, is this it? And I realized it's because the way in which I'd had to show up for my business in order to get to that point just was not sustainable. So the thought of redoing all of that and keeping on with that same trajectory of growth, it just felt really overwhelming and really exhausting. So that really caused me to sort of look inwards and redefine how I really wanted to make money. Now, I'd already been exposed to money mindset work. So I'd done a lot of work around my money beliefs and, working hard, but I still realized that there was this big correlation between my worth and how hard I was working, and therefore my worth and how much I was able to make. And so it felt like, on the one hand, I was saying to myself, look, I'd love to make my money in a way that feels really fun, feels really feminine, and where I can sort of lean back a little bit more. Yet equally, I didn't really believe if I was to take away my ability to work hard, which I was wearing as a badge of honor. I always kind of felt like I may not know the most in the room, I may not have the biggest audience, but I could outwork anybody. So it was almost like I was so attached to that label. And if I was to let that go, my sort of fear was, well, what is going to prove myself worthy of receiving money? Mm-hmm. So that was a big one for me. But that ability to receive as well, that really came into play because I realized as well, and this was a big part of me shifting into my feminine, the masculine side of me not only needed to prove herself by working hard, but also really struggled to surrender and to let go. So I liked to be in control of everything, which meant that I was often really struggling to let go of control within my business, which really hindered my growth financially. If I was to take my business to that next level, I would need to bring on a team. And that was something that I had a lot of fears around, that ability to release control, to accept, to support, and really just surrender to the process a little bit more. So up until this point, I'd been very, very methodical in how I worked. I'd been very strategic, and it had been very linear in its approach. And I realized that made things always feel more difficult because it felt like I had to overplan everything, overthink everything. And it was exhausting. So I realized that, yes, I want to continue growing, but I want to do so in a way that just feels more relaxing, like feels like I'm going with the flow a little bit more, and I'm not putting all of this intense, incredible pressure on myself all the time. However, I equally do not want to reduce my standards. I still want to set the bar high in terms of what I want myself and my business to accomplish. However, it's got to be a different way. And so I started to sort of explore money mindset more. And this was what led me to the feminine and the masculine. And I realized that, wow, I actually really been sat in my masculine for my whole life. And this is the only way I know to succeed. So for me, I kind of talk about it as me stepping into my feminine leadership era. And it was really a gradual process where I sort of played around with finding my own sweet spot between the masculine and feminine, and kind of figuring out what was going to work for me. It wasn't about abandoning my masculine, but it was about leaning into my feminine more and feeling safe to do that, feeling safe to slow down, feeling safe to surrender, feeling safe to not work so hard all the time. And yeah, again, I still feel like I'm on that journey as well, but it's something that completely revolutionized how I show up for my business, how I make money. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to start really transitioning into that side of coaching as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said about, you had to figure out what it was for you, because it's really a non-negotiable in business and even in money. Like, I'm teaching just a 14-day broadcast, but I'm talking about, how to change your relationship with money, and also the fact that you have to figure it out on your own. Like, you can learn all of these things and understand, some of the deeper reasons why we create certain relationships or project certain things on money. But then when it comes to shifting it, you have to figure out what is going to work for you and like what you want that relationship to be. And I think it's the same with business. And I relate so much to what you're saying. I'm just kind of in year 4 right now, and I'm looking back on year 3, and it was kind of the same thing, but the opposite for me, where I did my whole business in the beginning on my intuition. Literally, I had nothing planned out. I had strategy, but like, it was basically like me and just my intuition. And then it was like having to now be like, okay, like, let's look more at strategy and planning things out and creating like more of a method. But it's a similar thing of marrying the masculine and the feminine, but also finding what is actually going to work for you. And I think that is the only way that you can really create a business that is sustainable and stands the test of time, is finding what that is for you, you know? So I'd love to hear too. I mean, I know you have your certification and everything, but when you kind of made that shift, how did that look actually inside your business? Like, what were the things you might have like changed or done differently, or your programs or your offerings to support that feminine energy?
I think, like you said, it was about finding that sort of sweet spot. So when I first started playing around with being in my feminine energy more, I thought, okay, I'm going to totally lean into this and see what happens. And I threw away the strategy. I thought, I'm just going to let my intuition guide me, which was for me really, really uncomfortable because I felt very connected to my intuition. However, my problem was allowing myself to just fully trust it and not overthink things. So my intuition would tell me one thing, and then my logical mind would come up with all of these different ideas and strategies. And I just couldn't let things be easy. And that's what I love actually about being in the feminine, is that things can be so much easier because it's just the answers often come up for us straight away. Whereas when we're in the masculine, it's that over analyzing, overthinking, like that logical brain. And sometimes that can be exhausting. But yeah, so for me to start off with, it was leaning totally into my feminine. And I did things like, I threw out all of like the rule books when it came to like our launch processes and the strategy that we have behind social media and our marketing strategy. And I was just doing things very much on a whim. And it was very kind of, in my head, it was sort of messy because I wasn't used to this. I was very much used to kind of things being in a logical order. So it felt very, very messy. And if I'm going to be completely honest, being totally in my feminine just did not work for me either, because I don't know, I had this sort of restlessness. And so I thought, well, what is this here? Is this because I'm not in alignment? Is it because I'm just scared to be in my feminine more? And I realized like this doesn't need to be an either or thing. And I think for every woman, it's about finding your balance between the two opposing energies. So a good example of this for me when it comes to sort of structure within my week, I'm very structured in terms of like, I like to have things sort of planned and organized of, this is what's going to be happening when it comes to things that need to happen within the business. But then I started to carve in time where it's like, actually, this is intentional time where I'm not going to plan anything and I'm just going to see what my intuition is calling me to do. So it's kind of using a blend of both. And then when it comes to, let's say, for example, on the business side of things, we'll have sort of our strategies in place of things that we know that have worked based upon masculine concepts such as data. And, we're very big into sort of tracking everything and knowing our numbers. And that's the very masculine side of business. But then we'll often just try things and we'll be like, let's just throw out the rule book here and let's just lean into our intuition. So with myself and with my team as well, and we'll come up with ideas. And sometimes these ideas won't make any sense and we kind of won't really plan them out too much and we'll kind of let them unfold quite organically. And we'll just see what happens. And sometimes those things work really well and sometimes those things don't really work really well. But it's allowing us to have this more playfulness, lightness with the work that we do, which I think is so important to bring you back to that place of joy. Because if we're always doing things like tracking the numbers and tracking goals, it's like it always becomes about the end destination and not the journey. And such a masculine approach to life. It's like we've got to get to this outcome no matter what. Whereas I love to be able to now just embrace that journey a little bit more and be a bit more playful and just be like, oh, okay, well, this works, great. If it doesn't matter. We can see what we've learned from that. And it's just enjoying that process a little bit more. So that for me has been a big, big thing when it comes to my business and bringing the feminine in. And then I guess the other will be the part of the surrendering part, like the surrendering control, relinquishing that control for me, bringing on my team. It's something that I really struggled to do for a long time. And I had so many instances where I would bring somebody on and then I'd sort of freak out and be like, oh no, they're not right, and end that relationship. And it wasn't that they weren't right. It was just that I wasn't ready. And just I wasn't ready to let go of that control. So for me, just handing the reins over a little bit more and trusting other people a little bit more for me has been, a wonderful way to be in my feminine. And it was also really helped with the business side of things too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know I remember when I first hired my first assistant, it was hard because I realized that I was not communicating clearly with her at all. And I was like, oh my God. And at first I'd be like, why did she do this wrong? Or why didn't this work out? Or what is going on? And then I'm like, wait, I am not communicating. And it was like all kind of coming from this place of like feeling bad, like feeling like I don't want to burden her. I don't want to put too much on her. But then I was just not communicating clearly or not saying everything I wanted. And then it was causing more problems. And it was just so interesting to like see that show up inside of that relationship. And then it's like this really amazing invitation to just get so much better at being in your authority, saying what you mean, being clear, being unapologetic. And like that was one of the biggest things I learned when I first hired an assistant, because it's funny because you think that it's just going to be something that makes your life easier and then you can grow, but it's actually like challenging in all these other ways.
It's so true. And it's the micromanaging as well for me. I was like, what is the point in me hiring somebody if I'm then still going to show up and do this work anyway and micromanage? But yeah, for me, I sort of messily navigated through that sort of period where I was new to hiring a team. I'm just actually thinking out loud now. I'm like, somebody should do more. I'm sure somebody does do coaching around this, but kind of navigating that sort of when you first start to bring on team members, because it was a lot.
Yeah. And I remember just being like, what do I even tell her to do? Like,
yeah. Well, I was the opposite because I had all of these very methodical processes of like basically a playbook for how the whole business works. So it was like, okay, well, here's the playbook. But then it was like, I just couldn't trust that she would get on with that. And it's like, again, just the micromanaging, but yeah.
That's really funny. But yeah, it's honestly, I feel like when you bring on support like that, it does give you the opportunity to be more in your feminine because they can provide like that masculine like container of like the execution and the action, and you can be more in your feminine, but then like you just actually have to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Then the other thing I'd love to hear about too is more about your certification, because obviously, I have a certification and it's a very interesting thing to do because I know for me, and I'd love to hear your experience with this. When I first started my certification, I was like, can I really teach this? Like, I didn't trust that I could teach the thing that I knew how to do. And then obviously you can. And I always tell people that I'm like, no, you can, like, you can break it down. So like, what was that like for you? And then also what is your process or your way of teaching?
I think I was exactly the same as you. And especially because I still felt like in the grand scheme of things, I still felt relatively new to coaching. So a part of me was like, no, I need to wait for this. Like, I can't be launching a certification now. Like, this seems wild given that 5 years ago, like I was only just kind of exploring this space. But for me, I think a big thing was recognizing that there was a demand there because everything that I was looking for online when it came to coach certifications was very masculine and very corporate. And a lot of the women that I knew that had been through coach trainings, they were doing quite masculine types of coaching. So they were like executive coaches or career coaches or high performance coaches. And nothing wrong with that. I love that type of coaching. But it was, I think, especially for a lot of women, they realized that they were coaching in a way that kind of felt quite masculine. So I could see the gap in the market there. And I think this is where like our intuition and the universe gives us these little nudges, because I kept getting all of the signs. As soon as that sort of desire was planted in my head, it's like if you want a red car and you start thinking about it, you start seeing red cars all over the place. It was the same thing. So everywhere I looked, I just felt like all of a sudden my news feed, I mean, probably the algorithm is to blame for this as well, but my news feed was filled with all of these certification programs. And it just felt like I was getting signs from everywhere. So I think my sort of first step was kind of getting clear on the values of what I wanted my coach certification to be. And so sort of my thing has always been like helping just women really become the best coaches that they can be so that they can serve their clients at the highest level. So it was really about producing a really high quality training where women were really skilled, but also really confident as well. because I realized that a lot of the coaches I knew were great at what they did and they had all of these trainings under their belt, but really struggled with the imposter syndrome. So it was that despite all of their external achievements, there was a part of them that said, well, who am I to coach on this subject? Who am I to, help women when I perhaps don't have my own life figured out? So I realized for me in my certification, it needed to be a combination of both giving women those incredible skills, but then also helping them overcome that sort of confidence piece. So, they feel equipped to be able to go out and serve their clients. And obviously, things like, when we're coaching or healers or, we're in a service-based industry, our education is going to be continuous, right? We're constantly proving our gifts, learning new skills, developing and refining our programs further. So we're kind of going to always be the ever student, but there's got to be a point which we say, I'm good enough and I may not be perfect right now, but I am enough as I am. And that kind of willingness to start then taking on those paid for clients. So that's kind of where it started, with those sort of two core pillars of the coach training coupled with the mindset. And then we all also realized, well, actually a lot of my success has been based on the strategy within my business as well. So it's giving the coaches them the tools to then actually build their business online with the practical side of things, which is more of the masculine, I guess, the systems, the processes and the funnels, which it's something that I couldn't ignore because it did factor heavily into helping my business as a coach grow. I knew very early on, and luckily by this stage, I had learned to relinquish control in my business. So by this point, I already had a team. I had, a virtual assistant that works alongside me. I had a sales team. So I'd already been used to running and managing a team. And I knew that if I wanted to grow my coaching certification in the way that I wanted, I wouldn't be able to be the person that was doing all of the training sessions. So I knew very, very early on, I wanted to bring on other expert coaches. So what I thought would be sort of a good thing would be to kind of think about, well, what is going to be my unique sweet spot and my core zone of genius, and what could other people bring into this training that I perhaps am not able to offer? So yeah, I knew very early on that it was going to be a certification where they'd get access to these other coaches as well. And yeah, it was the first time we launched it. It's very much evolved over time since then. And something that I think I've got quite good at this is not trying to create the most perfect product at the launch. And this isn't to say it's putting out something like crappy, but it's knowing that you are going to grow, you are going to learn more, and you are going to refine yourself. And as you do, your program will probably refine over time as well. So I've kind of taken this approach to that program continuously evolving over time. So we're constantly getting feedback from our students, we're adding in trainings just to make it the best it can be. And so it's kind of my sort of philosophy when I work with my clients. It's like, this doesn't need to be perfect right now. Choose progress over perfectionism and allow yourself and your work to be that work in progress as well.
I love that. And I totally agree. Because I even will see for myself when I'm launching something, it'll change as I'm launching it too. Because as I talk about it, I get more and more clear on it. And it's so important to evolve things because like I even noticed, because this is now my second round of my certification, and I've just gotten so much better at not only teaching trauma, but also like I've gone so much deeper with myself and other people. Like I have more to teach now. You know what I mean? So it's even like adding things in that before I might not have thought to talk about, that now I'm like, oh, this is something I can go a lot deeper into. So it's like, it would be not helpful to anyone if I just like didn't evolve it, because I'm evolving, and like,
exactly.
I think it's so important to continue to evolve as you evolve and just letting it continue to evolve. And I think with not just the certification, but every program, so important.
I kind of liken it to like when Apple launched its first iPod. It probably had the technology that it did, when it launched the first version of the iPod. If it had waited, let's say, another 3 years, it probably could have launched a better version of it. But it's like, okay, we know that this isn't going to be the finished product. It's that constantly evolving over time. Like we put it to market and we get feedback, we refine it. And actually, I think that's a way to create a better program, whether that's a coaching program or a certification program, is getting that constant feedback, because we can think we know the best way to teach something or to share content or to coach somebody. But actually, often when we're getting that feedback, we realize there's a better way, or things can be done a little bit different, or, we learn something new. So it's just having that sort of constantly evolving mindset, that growth mindset. And that's what I think is going to help you serve your clients as well at a better level.
Oh, absolutely. And I noticed for myself too, you've probably noticed this when there's something that you're good at. Like, so for example, this came up in my certification where, I've been doing breathwork with people for so long. There's like certain things that I don't remember that people don't know. The other day we were talking about just leading someone through a breathwork session, and they wanted me to share all the different prompts that I say to people. And I was like, I never even thought of doing that, because those things have come naturally to me for so long that I didn't even think that people wouldn't know that. And then when they said it, I was like, oh my God, totally. So I made them a whole PDF with every single thing to say at what point and everything. But I wouldn't have thought to do that, because those things that come naturally to you, you don't realize it doesn't come naturally to them. So it's you have to kind of listen to that and then evolve it, because if not, then it's not going to be the best that it could be.
Yeah. And I had a business mentor that I worked with once, and he was like, Dani, don't be the overzealous Sherpa, the people that carry all of the stuff. If you're going on a hike up a mountain and they carry all of your equipment, like your tents and your water. And so, the idea is that they pack on too much, because you're like, oh, we can take more water, we can take more things, but actually then they don't make it up the mountain. And I realized that I'd done that with a lot of my programs, where it was this, I need to give as much value as possible, thinking that more value meant a better service. But actually, sometimes because there was so much content, it completely overwhelmed people. So I've actually found a big part of refining my product has almost been scaling them back and making them simpler and helping people integrate things better. Because, people don't necessarily need more information. They need less, but things that work better, if that makes sense. So sort of simplifying and scaling back, which I never thought would be a part of I always thought it's about adding in more stuff, giving more, and more doesn't always equal more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. No, I've had that happen so many times where, because, I could talk about deep trauma for years and never get tired of it. But then it's I definitely can tell when I get to this point, people are maxed out, Alyse. You need to stop talking about the mother wound. They can't handle it.
Yeah.
And it is, I think it's you want to give people something that they can really take away and have a win from, versus so much information that it's what do I do with all this information?
I know. And I look back at some of, because we keep all of the past recordings, we keep them in the Click Academy, the coach training. And I look back at some of my earlier calls that I did, and they went on for hours. And I was like, oh my God, I'm sick of listening to myself. I'm why are they so long? And you can obviously see sort of the numbers. I mean, some people stuck right until the end, but I think when you're sort of pushing towards hour 3, it's how much are really people digesting at this moment? And again, I think back to that, and it was because it was new, and I was so desperate to just give everyone this amazing service and think, yes, this is the best thing ever. And for me, that's, okay, how much of my time can I give? And I actually realized that wasn't serving anybody. It wasn't serving me because I was getting exhausted, and it wasn't serving my clients because the people that tapped out early were thinking, oh, maybe I've missed something. And then the people that stayed till the end, they were probably spending too much time on something when it could have been taught in, an hour session. So it was interesting.
Yeah, no, it's all part of the learning, but I totally agree. And because I think for myself, when I've been on calls that are over 2 hours, I can't. So it's so I'd love to kind of go back for a minute, because I find it really interesting too. Obviously you had an amazing job, career that paid really well. And I always find this interesting because for me, I was a school counselor. I didn't make any money. So the idea of leaving and having my own business, it wasn't hard for me to leave because it wasn't I made that much money anyway. So I knew I could make more money. But I always find it interesting, like leaving a job where you are making decent money and you can make money. Like, was that really hard? And then did you leave before you started your business at all? Or like, what was that process for you?
I was right at the beginning of my legal career. So even though that the capacity to earn amazing money was there, it was still at the beginning. Now, don't get me wrong, it was still good money. But I was also living in London, which is probably one of the most expensive cities to ever live in. So even though I was earning good money, like financially, it didn't look as if, I certainly didn't look from an outsider's point of view. I was living in a flat with a lot of people in a flat share, which, wasn't the most high vibe of situations. And I think as well, because I wasn't very good with money, I was always spending way over my means. So even though I was earning an okay salary, it always kind of felt like I was pretty poor. Mm-hmm. But the capacity to earn was there. And I think that was one of the things that kind of led me into the legal world, because I thought, okay, I can make really good money. And at the time, like for me, the thought of making six figures, I remember finding out like how much some of the senior partners made in my firm. And I was like, they make what? It was like £350,000 a year. And I was like, that is insane. Like my mind just couldn't even comprehend that type of money. There was a part of me that was really, it was money motivated. I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't have that within me. But I think for me, I realized very quickly that it wasn't going to be worth it if it meant sacrificing how I was feeling. And I would rather like just trudge along and get by than be super money motivated and be in something that was completely soul destroying. So, well, I'll tell you the story. So it was a crossover period. So I was very much like building up my business whilst I was in a job. I couldn't afford to just quit my job and go all in on my business unless I was making money, because I had rent to pay. I had credit card debts racked up that were pretty significant. I had things like student loans as well. So I was like, wanted to kind of be able to go out and enjoy myself too. So I had to have this sort of crossover period where, I'm not going to lie, it was intense. I was getting up super early to work on my business, going to work, coming back in the evenings, working again. I didn't realize at the time, but I look back now and I was very much battling high functioning anxiety, because I was doing this work because I was passionate about it and I was being fueled by that passion. But at the same time, it was that I've got to escape this job. So there was definitely that element of desperation there, because I felt like I just needed a way out. And so I was kind of functioning at this, very much anxious way, working the weekends as well, very much sacrificing my time. And so from this point of actually launching my business, so I'd done my training, launching my business, to actually quitting my job, it was a 3-month period. And people say, oh, that seems really, really quick. But actually, with full disclosure, like I was working intensely during that time. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to do a few hours here and there. It was literally like, this has to work. There is no choice but for this to work. So it was a pretty intense period. And then when I kind of then did go into my business full time, it was really hard for me to then slow down, because I got so used to working in such an intense way, which, going back to what I spoke about earlier, very much was the theme of my sort of early years into my business. But for me, the stepping away and actually leaving that sort of financial security, I'd already seen proof that people were willing to pay me for my coaching. So in my head, I was like, well, this is only going to get better from here. I'd done a lot of work on my own sort of mindset and beliefs by this point. So I felt like I got to a really good level of self-belief that if I can get it this far, I can get it that far, and I can continue with this, and this is going to work. My issue was the people that didn't understand it, because it felt like I couldn't really be open about what I was doing. My friends and my family members, like they knew like the path that I was on, but they just thought that it was wild. And for me, a big thing was that feeling of guilt, because I was the first person in my family to go to university. And so a big part of me going into law was, I realized it was to make my parents proud. Like I really wanted to show them like, I'm going to be successful. I'm going to go to university. I've got good grades. I'm going to do this. And they were so excited for me, and they were so proud. Like when they would tell like their friends, like, oh, my daughter's, going to be a lawyer. So it felt like I was really letting them down, to step away from that. And for ages, they couldn't understand it. And so it was real, this sort of like guilt that I was battling with. And I think whenever not so much anymore, but it used to be that whenever I was met with difficult emotions, such as guilt, such as feeling like, I'm letting somebody down, my instant response would just be to overwork or to do something to numb myself out. So I would busy myself with working. Mm-hmm. So previously I'd done this with shopping. It was now work became my new addiction. So yeah, it took them a while to kind of understand, I think, what I was doing. But I think the important thing was that I knew that I was on the right path. And I was like, at the moment, I don't need everybody to understand this, but I trust I'm on the right path. I can see evidence that people are willing to pay me. And I have to just trust that this is going to continue. So I made that leap. It was 3 months into my coaching business that I handed in my notice. I then had to let my notice period play out. But I think once you take that leap, you kind of get rid of that safety net, and you show up, I think, for your work in a different kind of energy, because there no longer was a plan B. I was like, I've got to make this work. And and I've never looked back since.
Yeah, no, I think that's such an important piece around like what other people are going to think. Because I think that's one of the biggest things that stops people is feeling like guilty, or that people aren't going to understand, or people are going to think you're crazy. I mean, I definitely thought that for sure. I thought that people definitely thought that I was crazy and didn't understand. And I even thought, I was like, am I being totally not responsible as a parent? And because it does feel that way when you leave the security of something.
So did you have children when you started then?
Yes.
See, this is the difference for me as well, because I felt like maybe it would have been a different story if I had my kids at the time, but at the time it was just me. So I kind of felt like it was like, well, you know what, if I don't make any money, it's fine, because I can sleep in like a spare room on somebody's floor, like I am. Yeah. But I think it makes it a whole different set of, responsibilities and pressure when you've got, kids as well.
Oh my God. Yeah, for sure. And like, my husband has always been an entrepreneur. So my job was like the health insurance and the like security. So it was a really big thing. And it was definitely scary, but it's just like, you just do it, because I know for me, I got to the point, and I'm sure you felt this way as well, where you were just like, you just can't do it anymore. You just have to stop. You just can't do it anymore. And that's how I felt. And I feel like you just have to know that it's going to work. And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just deciding. It's like, this is going to work. I'm not open to any other possible alternative. And I think when you come at things with that kind of energy, like the universe matches that energy and gives you that clarity as well. I think there's definitely been times when I've been like, because obviously as your business grows, your lifestyle up levels as well. And so you get used to, all of a sudden your expenses are a lot more because, you've got, a bigger house, and you're used to, kids' private education or the holidays or whatever. So you kind of get used to a certain standard of living. And it's like, well, I've not only just got to make this money, but I've got to sustain this as well. And I've got to continue on that growth. So it's getting into the mindset of, okay, I can make this money, but I can also continue to grow it. And I find that there's definitely been times when I've recognized that sort of self-sabotaging coming in, where I'm like, okay, I can get myself to this point, but can I maintain it at that level? And it's kind of that worry that creeps in. But yeah, so I feel like every time you up level, it's almost you up level and there's a new devil, and it's a new set of like beliefs or things that you've got to work through, which is where I'm sure, again, with like breath work, that probably comes into it as well, right? Like coming back to it, it's not just like a one time and done. It's like this continuous kind of journey of using it and needing these tools to take you further and further.
Exactly. No, it's so true. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. That was like, I'm sure that's going to be so helpful for people to hear. And thank you for everything you shared. Can you tell people like where they can find you if they want to learn more about what you do? And if you have anything fun coming up too?
Yeah, sure. So we have a few things. We have, for anybody that's perhaps new to coaching, we have an introductory Become a Coach course, which I can provide your audience with a link to. For anyone interested in learning more about feminine leadership, we also have a feminine leadership workshop as well. So I can give you a couple of links to share with your audience.
Yeah.
But then you can also find me at Dani_Watson_coaching on Instagram. And I also run a podcast called The Click as well. So yes, that's where you can find me.
Yay. Thank you so much. And we'll link all of that stuff below. But thank you so much for being here. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed this conversation and meeting you and getting to know you a little bit more too.
Yes, thank you.
If you are wanting to build your own successful online coaching business, make sure to check out Freedom, Abundance and Impact, our free 10-day business and mindset course for coaches and aspiring coaches. To access, simply head to wearetheclick.com and click free course in the menu.